All right, and it's gone 9:30, so we will make a start. Welcome everybody. Can I just say that I'd like to advise members that this is a public workshop and as such has been recorded and will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional website as soon as possible following the conclusion of this workshop. Just opinions expressed or statements made by individual persons during this meeting are not the opinions or statements of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Council accepts no liability for any opinions and statements made during the meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to further plans towards the public transport, the regional public transport review. So we will be presented by Bron Healy, and then we will have a session on fares and financial sustainability by James. So welcome to those. Can I ask that staff have asked that members of the committee have their cameras going wherever possible so that we can record your presence at the meeting? And staff, if you present, can you please turn your cameras on when you present? First of all, let's just check that we've got everything. Yep. Can I call for apologies first, please? Do we have any apologies that we know about? There have been none. I'll move straight on to, I think, Bron, you're going to take, is Bron on? Yes, he is. I think you're going to head us out on this. So welcome. Bron's been doing quite a lot of preparatory work on this review, and we will hear where we're up to. Just as welcome to those that have come on since I welcome the others. So that's Mayor Webber and Stephen, Commissioner Selwood, and Norm. Welcome to you. If we can try to use the reaction button on your screen to raise your hand, but I've got my monitors in front of me, so I should be able to pick you up if you just put your hand up. And welcome, Mayor Turner, to you too. Okay, Bron, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and morning all. I'll just start off by sharing my screen.
While he's sharing the screen, we do recognise that Zoom can be quite tiring, actually, if it goes for too long. So we've planned that they'd already planned a morning tea break at 11:30, but I'm suggesting that we probably will bring it, have a 10-minute break a bit earlier than that, but we'll see how we go. Thank you. Bron.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you just work my mouse. So essentially the purpose of today's workshop is to commence developing the strategic framework for the regional public transport plan. Just briefly the agenda for the day. So part A, I will facilitate and we'll run through aspects of the strategic framework for the public transport plan. And then part B will be led by James on the fares and financial sustainability, as the chair said. So I'm making the assumption you've all received your workshop pack with this presentation in it. It also contains some supplementary information with some sort of key data and trends in public transport, and a summary analysis of feedback from the early engagement process. I thought how I'd run through the agenda is I will briefly summarise the background information in the slides, but we'll largely assume that you've all had the opportunity to review it. And then when we've get to the discussion slides, I guess, we'll stop there for sort of comments and questions and then open the discussion to members. We've got Elaine on on the Zoom meeting taking notes for us. And I'll also just have the presentation notes page up, and we'll endeavour to capture some of the ideas as they come through. So I'll just briefly summarise the background slides. So that's just background information on the process we were up to in the RPTP review, and as I've mentioned, the agenda for today's workshop. This slide just covers off why a strategic framework is important. So the RPTP is a strategic document, has a 10-year plus strategic view, but with a focus on the first 3 years of that process because it gets reviewed on a 3-yearly cycle. So within the strategic framework, we will be endeavouring to set out what we want our public transport system to achieve, a vision, longer term goals and objectives, and then following on from that, how we propose to get there. So things like focus areas and policies to help achieve our goals. So moving from the what to the how we do it. This slide just outlines the sort of proposed process flow for the strategic framework, flowing from challenges and opportunities through the vision, objectives, focus areas, policies and actions, and the plan. This sort of framework has been developed from RPTP guidance material that we have, and it also draws on recent practice from other regional public transport plans. And as I've mentioned, I've included some sort of information on key data and trends in your supplementary material to help inform your thinking on each of these aspects of the strategic framework. Okay, were there any questions or comments about the sort of overall proposed structure for the strategic framework or that background information?
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. Good to see everybody. Just one thing, I had a look at the last public transport plan that we had, and it didn't have a vision in it. Is the addition of a vision a relatively new requirement?
I think the vision's optional. That seems to have become a fairly standard process in the most recent plans that have come out. So yeah, it's really optional for the committee. If it wants a vision or it doesn't want a vision, then it's up to you guys to decide.
All right, Mayor Webber. You're on mute. You're on mute, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
I see that the title page is Regional Public Transport Plan Review. And hopefully we've learnt from the Regional Land Transport Plan, there is no need to go back to first principles. And I just wonder if we look, we already have a plan, and are we better not to identify what are the fatal flaws in the existing plan, if there are any? What has changed from when we wrote the last plan? Why did we miss our targets, and what are our corrective actions? Because we don't need to go right back to first principles. It's just what's the matter with the current plan, and why do we miss our targets? And what are we going to do to get ourselves into the space of actually doing something?
Very good comment, Mayor Webber. I believe one of the things that worries me is that a lot of the work we do, we don't use plain English, and so we love seem to love words in the regional council, and I want to see something that's more streamlined. And you're dead right. This is a review, and we do need to look at the challenges and opportunities is a very important section. Can I just say that I had a look at the 2007 plan review, and it quoted the smart growth and regional land transport targets for mode shift, and and gave a prediction for 2011 and 2021. And in the last 5 years, we've had no mode shift change that's noticeable, or very little. and we need to discuss, if we're going to talk about mode shift, and if that's our aspiration, we need to develop a genuine plan to get there, not just hyperbole. So thank you, Mayor Webber. You want to make another comment?
Yes, a supplementary that are we actually going to do that then? Because if we're not, I don't know really if I can add much value to this group.
I've certainly taken it on board, and I'd ask staff to as well. Bron, have you taken it on board?
Certainly that's kind of our approach. So when we've done our review of things like challenges and opportunities, we've looked at the existing plan and also identified sort of what's changed and what new documents have been produced in the intervening period. So we're thinking about things like mode shift plans and UFD and other strategic documents and a new GPS. So yeah, certainly not trying to reinvent the wheel if we can avoid it, but it's about probably trying to, I guess, improve and update what we currently have.
Any further questions before Bron moves on? Go, Bron.
Okay, so the first aspect is the challenges and opportunities in the plan. And the key question for us is, what do we want to identify in the next RPTP? As these help establish the context for the policy interventions and initiatives that follow. I've just added some simple definitions there, and also noted the guidance material from Waka Kotahi on challenges and opportunities. In terms of process, we've basically done a desktop review of the relevant strategic documents which are listed in the supplementary information. As I said, the existing plan and all those documents that have been produced since then. And essentially the technical staff and the project team have had a discussion about these and endeavoured to make a first cut of priority challenges and other challenges. So just noting, this wasn't a detailed technical assessment, it was a brainstorming exercise, and it's really just something to test with committee members whether they agree or disagree or not. So in terms of the project team perspective on things, the priority public transport challenges that we have identified are climate change and reducing emissions, high car dependency, a lack of transport choice resulting in low public transport use, meeting the access needs of isolated and transport disadvantaged communities, and achieving community buy-in to multimodal transport infrastructure. And the following slide is the rest of the long list. The vast bulk of these challenges that were identified in the existing documents, except for the last 3 or 4, which were kind of add-ins that the project team put in there as well.
Before we move on from, you're going to discussion, so it's good, because I think it's really important that we're clear as to get that priority list. To me, mode shift change is a really high priority. If we're going to get people out of cars, if we have to have a strategy that will do that. Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose I come back to my earlier comment. These are. Thanks for calling it a brainstorming. I think it's a mind dump more than anything of fluff around the outside. The major challenge we have is the failure to achieve modal shift over the last 15 years. If that's not top of mind, and what are we going to do to fix it, then all this other stuff is just not adding any value at all. We have to address the issue.
Thank you, Mayor Webber. You're a man after my own heart. Councillor Rose.
Kia ora koutou, rangatira mā. I just want to tautoko what's been said, but also just emphasise the fact that staff have put as a priority challenge a lack of transport choice resulting in low public transport use. One, I'd like to ask staff what they mean by that, and two, just put, as we go through this process, just encourage us to be open and open-minded in regards to what sort of transport choices are out there. I think that Mayor Webber has a very valid point. We need to fix it, and I think in the times we're in now, now is the best time more than ever to get out there and have a bit more of an open mind and be a bit more creative. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Any further comments on that before we move along and open the discussion further? Jane.
I just, I agree with Mayor Webber. That was the thing that was top of mind. It's about why is public transport use declining as opposed to increasing with all of the efforts that we've been putting into it. So to me, that is one of the major challenges, and there's lots of reasons, but to me, that's a key one for us. I do agree with the emphasis on climate change and the need to reduce emissions. I think that is a major challenge for us. I also think that's an opportunity with the government's policy settings around that. I also agree that meeting the access needs of isolated and transport disadvantaged communities should be way up there as a challenge, because it's not easy to do with a dispersed population across the region. I would suggest that high car dependency is part of the failure to achieve the mode shift. So, you know, there's quite a few things that can be unpacked or tucked in underneath that first one that Mayor Webber mentioned. As achieving community buy into multimodal transport infrastructure. That's another one that could be tucked in under that overarching issue and challenge that Mayor Webber has highlighted.
Councillor Brunning.
Yes, 90% of our people just don't want to use public transport, won't use it. So we need more tools in the toolkit if we're going to change public attitude around this. We don't have the stick when it comes to congestion pricing, things like that. And we don't have the carrots like signalised stops that allow buses to go on through, etc. So the other thing is we need to identify what is our target. Are we talking about commuters? Are we talking about a social enterprise? So those are just my comments at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Brunning. Councillor Thurston, and then Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, Bron, these the staff's priority list, or as Mayor Webber has said, is this just a collection of thoughts and challenges? Can you clarify that first?
Well, all of these challenges were, except for the last three on the bottom of the remaining challenges list, were identified in these existing documents. So, for example, if we're talking about lack of transport choice, that was identified in Keeping Cities Moving, which is the National Mode Shift Plan, the Bay of Plenty Mode Shift Plan, UFTI, Western Bay of Plenty TSP, and the Rotorua Public Transport Review. So these have been identified from existing documents. It's not our wish list.
Just from my own personal perspective, in terms of challenges, I firmly believe that the biggest challenge we've got ahead of us, and as a number of speakers have said prior to this, is about no public buy-in to the whole concept of multimodal. And as Councillor Brunning has said, until such time as we put a much greater focus on the carrot and the stick, and focus on things such as congestion pricing, which I know is something that Commissioner Selwood and his team are working on. But no, high car dependency, it's not so much dependency, it's about the high availability of motor vehicles. You know, every property in the Bay of Plenty has 2, sometimes 3 vehicles parked in its drive. So until we get buy-in, public buy-in, I know there are pockets of support for it, but I firmly believe there is not widespread support across our region for the whole government concept of multimodal.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, followed by Leader. Oh, we've got a few. So just Mr. Thomas first, and then Chairman Leader, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Yep. Thank you, Chair, and through you. Look, just about the multimodal stuff, just a couple of comments. In Rotorua, we've had a good pickup on the cycling side of things, particularly. But I look to a lot of friends I have living in our capital city who are also into cycling and walking. They do that in summer. The part of the multimodal shift that breaks down for them is in winter, when we'd be hoping they'd use public transport, but actually they, even in congested Wellington, they revert to using cars in winter. And that there are a lot of things around, convenience and stuff like that there. So I think, yes, getting people into other forms of transport is important, but I think that accessibility, affordability and convenience of public transport is really important. I did note the other point, the challenge around distance communities or rural communities, and I live in one of those. And, for me, I'm 26 to 30 kilometres from Rotorua. There are a lot of hills between me. I couldn't cycle into town if my life depended on it. So with no public transport out our way, we're reduced to using cars. And that happens for a lot of our rural areas around Rotorua. And I think that brings me to my final point, is that we have quite different needs in our different communities and perhaps different challenges. And when we're working on this new policy or document, we should be keeping in mind that perhaps different areas need different solutions. Rotorua doesn't have the congestion of Tauranga, so a congestion charge might not be well accepted in Rotorua. Whakatane has different issues again. So I think, we need to be aware that one fit doesn't fit everyone. Thank you.
Totally accepted. Councillor Thompson. No, oh, sorry, it was meant to be Chairman Leader and then Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chairman. Look, it's all been said, but the reality is, and we've talked about it before, you need some form of intervention. Intervention is not popular. And I would just add that there was a good opinion piece written by Professor Jacklew and Rowath relative to whatever the carbon price is. And in her opinion, the carbon price would have to reach something like $900 before you actually drove the average or the above average individual to get out of their car and use public transport. The sad reality about that is that the carbon price, even where it is now and above, the major impost will fall to the lower socioeconomic participants in our community, as opposed to probably those who you want to target directly. So thanks, Andrew.
So that brings us to think about what is our strategy, what are we actually targeting, what do we want to achieve, because there's different outcomes for different choices. And if we really want to beat congestion in Tauranga, then that's going to make a different decision to if we want to do social engineering. Councillor Thompson, followed by Commissioner Selwood, followed by Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree that the focus of today's discussion should be on how we're going to get people on board. Getting people on board public transport, to me, should be the focus. I think the community panel, the bus user survey and the non-bus user surveys highlighted some extremely good, helpful hints in terms of actually how we can get more people on board. I totally support Phil's comments that we need to look at this sub-regionally as well as regionally. So I think the focus, irrespective of whether it's carbon emissions or whatever, we just need to get people on board. And I think, you know, there's a whole plethora of ways we can do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Love to hear the practical ways of doing that. Chairman Selwood.
Just been promoted. Thank you, Andrew.
Oh, Commissioner.
No problem. Hey, I totally agree with the conversation. I think we're all kind of on the same bus here. The problem is that the community and or our people aren't on the bus, and you know the key challenge for us. I don't know if I actually agree that the problem is lack of choice. I think there are a lot of choices that people can make, but they're not making for convenience and all of those sorts of things. There's plenty of buses running around, but they're running around empty. And so how can we get bums on seats is one of our biggest single challenges. And so I think, you know, that carrot and stick that others have mentioned and the role of road pricing, I think is fundamental to that, to encourage people to actually think about how they travel rather than just doing what they've always done. I think one of our other big challenges is money or the lack of. So we focus in on the affordability to consumers, but we've also got an affordability challenge organisationally about how much money we've got we can invest in both public transport service provision and investment in roading and walking and cycling and all of the various modes. And so revenue raising is an important component of the road pricing conversation as well as behaviour change. And I also think that part of our problem is that we're not that well targeted, that we're trying to provide services across the day to every destination at high frequency, which is really expensive, particularly when they're running empty. And so perhaps we need to be more targeted in our approach. How do we actually get commuters that can make the shift onto the buses? And B, make sure that we're rationing the money to the best advantage. And so I think informing ourselves with data on patronage by time of day, subsidy by route, by time of day, so that we know that we're allocating the existing funds that we've got to the absolute best advantage, I think is fundamental to getting the strategy right. And I've made the observations before in many of our meetings that, you know, we're looking at very high level patronage numbers and sadly they're trending down. And we need to get under the bonnet of that to understand what routes are trending down, what routes are trending up, how can we accelerate the pace of those that are trending the appropriate way, or how can we change or adapt our services to make sure that we're meeting people's needs so that they do use them. So those are some of the priorities that are not on the list to date that I think are relevant to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I was waiting for Chairman Leader to come in with intervention because we've talked about this now ad infinitum since 2004 that I'm aware of. And I think it is time we face the elephant in the room. And Councillor Thompson makes the point. We need to look at this regionally. Where are we going to get the biggest gains? The biggest gains are in Tauranga, followed by Rotorua, followed by Wakatani. And last of all, you know, you get to the Muraparas and the Taniatuas and those sorts of places where we're not going to get any gains at all. We have continuously talked about making car parking unaffordable to drive change. And all we've seen, no disrespect to the people in the chair, and I'm not talking about the commissioners now, we've worked hard to make parking more accessible and cheaper in Tauranga over the last 10 years. We've gone against the trend. We've said we need to fix it, but when the rubber hits the road, unfortunately, we don't do it. If we made car parking in the city unaffordable, then people would be no other option but to use buses. And that's the intervention that we've talked about. We just have to make the hard call. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Webber. any further comments to that? Staff, any responses? Namuta, what about you?
Oh, kia ora, councillors. Tēnā koutou. I think this is a very useful conversation for us in terms of all the areas that have been covered, are certainly areas that we've had on our radar. So I didn't have anything further to add.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment? Otherwise, we'll move on with Bron.
Okay, thanks for that. Quite a lot of food for thought there, and I'll endeavour to process that and come back to you in the next workshop. So moving on to opportunities, and essentially the same deal with opportunities as challenges. We ran a similar process looking at existing documents and strategies, including the existing plan. The project team, I guess, starter list as their sort of top of mind opportunities were, the first two were funding opportunities. For example, in the new government policy statement, with its prioritising investment in public transport to improve access to social and economic opportunities. A second one was the funding opportunities to deliver public transport that supports urban intensification efforts. And I think we're seeing things like the Te Papa Peninsula and Tauranga attracting some funding, but maybe more in the pipeline from government. Then there's that key question that I think everyone's sort of raised already today, which is like creating that competitive advantage over private vehicles with a range of interventions, whether they're bus priority, parking charges, or fare and policy initiatives. So how do those all work together to make it a logical choice for people to use public transport rather than their private vehicle? And then the two last ones on the list were some, I guess, some new opportunities or different models of delivering public transport into the future. So a key one that's front of mind at the moment is on-demand public transport, but also possibly mobility as a service as a future service offering once we get those, once we get the different modes that would contribute that up and running in the Bay of Plenty. Bear with me, sorry, having mouse issues. And then the second list of opportunities that were identified in these documents. I won't run through all those, so I've assumed you've had a good chance to review them and have your own views on whether they're more important than the others or vice versa. Yeah, so yeah, happy to open up for discussion or comments on this aspect of the plan.
Okay, so I've got hands up from Chairman Leader and Councillor Neves. Chairman Leader.
Thanks, Andrew. An associated question, Andrew, can someone just tell me, I don't think I've read it in this material here, to make a successful public transport enterprise, is there a critical mass in terms of the population you're dealing with available? I mean, I think Auckland must have reached it, but you know, when I hear commentary that Taniatua and Murupara, you've got to be dreaming. There's got to be a critical mass equation in here, whether it's New York, whether it's London or whatever. Does anybody have any idea what it is?
Staff?
Ron or James?
I could probably provide a comment. Yeah, I think, I guess it's sort of horses for courses, so it depends what you're talking about in terms of your services. So we've been considering things like what is a critical mass for something like rapid transit, and it's probably a bit, or the research is telling us that cities of the size of Auckland are probably more of the appropriate size for rapid transit than a smaller city in the sort of Australasian context. But if we're talking about right down the other end of the scale, Murupara, I think what we're fairly clear is that we're providing public transport for a different reason in the small communities. It's not about delivering mode shift per se, it's about providing people with access to essential community services and opportunities. In the cities, for example, Tauranga and Rotorua, we have sufficient population size to run an urban network, but I guess you sort of ramp that up according to the size of your population in terms of frequency and reliability and the interventions that you use.
Before I go to Jane, can I just say that in my view, we've got a fantastic public transport system in Tauranga and Rotorua. They're just not being utilised. And so we threw a lot of money. We went from 98 buses in 2018 to 135 buses. And then on top of that, we instigated the school bus service, which added another 60 part-time buses. So it's not a lack of buses, it's not a lack of money, it's actually getting people, finding a way to actually motivating them to change. So the likes of on-demand public transport in our two major urban areas, to me, is not an issue. We've got a really good service there. It's just, we have to find a way to get people on the buses. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. First a question. The bullet point funding opportunities to deliver public transport that supports urban intensification. I was just a bit unsure what that meant. Is that the buckets of funding that the government keeps on providing, for example, the Crown Infrastructure Partners funding for Cameron Road, or are you talking about future funding streams like congestion or road pricing? Could somebody enlighten me on that? And then I've got another comment.
I guess, yeah, that sort of came from Waka Kotahi, and I think the intent was sort of those existing funding streams, but also possibly with the new NPS and the requirements around intensification that needs to be delivered. I guess housing and transport need to be delivered together in packages, and there might be some new sort of opportunities in the pipeline coming through from different parts of government.
Thank you. Well, the other comment I've got about an opportunity, one of the challenges that I don't think we really investigated was some of the gains that we could be making in Tauranga we're not, because we don't have a fully integrated public transport planning and service delivery. We have infrastructure which is not being delivered as required to support the public transport services that we provide, and there are some of the reasons why people are not seeing the public transport system as being faster, more convenient, easy to use, etc. So I do believe that integration of, or better integration of planning and service delivery of public transport is a huge opportunity. If we can crack that and get some of the park and rides, some of the bus priority lanes, some of the hubs up and running, then we will have the chance of being successful in our mode shift. So that's one for me. I think it's a huge opportunity. It's being unrealised at the moment and needs to be. And then the other one, I do believe that the move to carbon neutral or zero emission public transport is an opportunity. I believe that people are starting to become aware of the challenges that we have with climate change and are looking for ways to mitigate their impact on the world. So I do believe that that is an opportunity. The whole climate change zero emission public transport issue, I think is something that we could make gains on.
We're going to go to Councillor Brunning, followed by Mayor Webber, followed by Mayor Turner, and then it'll be Councillor Thompson, Councillor Rose, in that order.
Yes, when it comes to opportunities, I mean, how game are we to take on some new concepts? I mean, someone talked a little while ago about the free car parking in Tauranga, etc. Are we prepared to go to setting targeted rates on more car parks? Are we prepared to go on a marketing campaign that and encourage employers to include public transport in remuneration packages? And when are we going to really get serious about park and ride? It's about changing the culture. And one of the big ones, of course, is, and we won't ever tackle it, is that we've got two organisations running public transport in Tauranga. And until we get to a CCEO of some description where we start to develop a culture of public transport as a whole, I don't know we're going to get very far. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Look, I agree with Councillor Nee's comments. And since we're talking about opportunities here, I was just going to cover off the opportunities that community concern around climate change gives us. The government's push for us to move to low emission buses or electric buses, and the ability to rebrand under that. And I think that is a really strong brand. I know here in Rotorua, there is a really strong interest in addressing climate change issues and emission issues, especially amongst a younger population, and they're the ones who are going to be using public transport over in future years. So I think that putting those three things together is a real opportunity for us in terms of putting forward an environmentally friendly brand rather than necessarily competing just on economic comparisons with driving cars.
Thank you. Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think we need to go back to where Chairman Leader asked the question. There's enough evidence around about what population is required to support the services. And I think that's where Councillor Thompson made the point earlier. We have to look at the different regions, or the sub-regions, rather than the region on a whole. Tauranga most probably can support a commuter bus service. But Taniatua and Murupara, those, not at all. And what we've got to work out is what is the commuter problem you're trying to solve and what's the social service? Now, I know in Te Puke, in Kadikadi, Waihi Beach, the Cancer Society, the St. John's are running on-demand services to get people to appointments. Now, are we going to try and kill them and put our own service in place to replace that? I think we've got to work out what can we do and what do we encourage St. John's to grow their service, or the Cancer Society to grow their service, because they do it a lot more cost effectively than we will, and focus on where we can get commuter transport working for us. And pretty much in the cold hard light today, and there's enough evidence around the world, Doug, to answer your question, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Tauranga is most probably on the cusp of having enough. Rotorua will be marginal. This is stuff you can get straight off of the off of some of the, like UCLA that run a whole lot of transport programs through the university. All the evidence is available. So we're trying to solve a problem the wrong way. And yes, we might have thrown a whole lot of buses at it, but was that actually the way to solve the problem? I don't believe so. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Turner.
Hi, thank you. Look, if critical mass is the main driver, then it's almost irrelevant me being at this meeting. But what I'd like to challenge with is the idea that right now, the way that the public transport is operated is that you have using buses, and you've done it in such a way that competition of any kind would have to meet that same standard of vehicle, and therefore there's no real opportunity for communities like Whakatane, Kawerau and Opotiki to attract the same subsidy that the big buses get in Tauranga to maybe a private provider that could do it very cost effectively. They're motivated by having a profit line, but they can attract the same subsidy that the big blue buses in Tauranga are attracting. An openness to private investment could well be something that could support the type of service that's needed and the type of vehicles that we need to be looking at for smaller communities, because actually many of them have people who, you go to places like Minganui, how they get people to medical appointments is very difficult. And a lot of these private things, St John's Ambulance and some of those things that you've talked about, as far as I'm aware, they don't get any of the subsidy that would be given if a big blue bus was doing the same job. So what I'm thinking is, can we really rethink, particularly for those communities that lack critical mass that justifies a big blue bus, and we've got them driving around Whakatane with one person in them? Can we look at an openness and willingness to subsidise providers that are doing a good job that aren't owned by regional council?
I think you open up a really interesting question there, Mayor Turner, and it's something that we need to talk to NZTA, because it would require government support to do. We can't do that on our own, but it's a really thoughtful presentation. Thank you.
Can I just add one more point to, sorry, can I
Yep.
just add one more thing? And that is that in some of our isolated rural communities, there's beautiful brand new vans used by kohanga reo, by schools, owned by the Ministry of Education often, who sit idle from 9 in the morning through till 3 in the afternoon. But is there an opportunity for those to be better utilised? They sit there and there are people who can't get to their doctor's appointment.
Good question to go to staff. Councillor Thompson, followed by Councillor Rhodes.
Yeah, thank you. I want to speak in support of the comments that have been made about the need for an integrated system. I've been banging my gums about this for 6 years now, and have had absolutely no success whatsoever, which leads me to believe that my time as a councillor is nigh about to expire, because I've been totally unsuccessful. In preparation for today's meeting, I surfed the net to look for critical success factors for successful public transport, and the top of the list was an integrated system. Now, Stephen, forgive me, but I'm going to get a little bit emotive now, because I have been advocating for a bus shelter in Millers Road, sorry to say Tauranga, for 5 years. That is probably where most people catch the bus into town to go to work or to do whatever, and they stand, there isn't even a seat, they stand in wind and rain, and elderly people have to cross the road where there is a bus shelter. This is just not good enough. It is not good enough. And frankly, if we haven't got the you-know-what to actually address the real issues here, which is urban design in Tauranga, and a lack of an integrated system, then what are we all doing here? Seriously, we're just going to keep clapping our gums. So sorry, Stephen. I'd like to invite you out to Millers Road one day, and you can come and have a look at what I'm talking about. But seriously, we've got to move the dial on some of these really critical issues. And I think we need an integrated system where people are living and breathing a customer service, and we can really move the dial on it. So sorry about that, Stephen. I'll shout to your beer at some stage.
I see you've got your hand up to respond. Councillor Rose, should we allow Commissioner Selwood to respond first?
Thank you, and I agree, not having bus shelters on prime locations is nuts. So we need to fix it. The good news is that there's provision in the long-term plan for about I recall, 100 bus stops. So I would have thought that would be priority. So I'd be very interested in getting a list of priorities for. But I do think it needs to be informed by patronage numbers. And so clearly, if Miller's Road was it, if that's one of the prime stops, then let's get that right up the top of the list. The other provision in the long-term plan is for the bus terminals. The challenge that we have there is obviously getting through the business case process, but it's something that Tauranga City is very motivated to accelerate. And that wider message around the need for integration, once again, fully supported. We need to join up the infrastructure investment with the service provision, but I still make the case that that needs to be informed by OFTI, TSP, and our data analysis so that we've got the right investment going to the right places quicker.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, look, I want to talk all what's been said in and around the Zoom call, but I also just wanted to say that we need to ensure when we're looking at an integrated system, we want to be able to take our communities with us in regards to that. I know I'm a stickler for saying we need to take our community with us on this, but the thing is that as it's been said countless of times, the biggest opportunity here is one of the better opportunities is better community engagement and better community buy-in. And actually, the thing here is that we've just got to get down and ask those questions. I understand we've got these different surveys and all of that, but actually that's having them come to us. We need to stop with that mindset and really move forward into the let's go to them and figure out what actually needs to be done. Catching buses in Tauranga, I would say that it's the service is good. Andrew, you are correct. Like, we do have a very good bus service here in Tauranga. It is about trying to get people on them, and the opportunities that staff have listed are very, how do you put it? They're very good as such, but I think there can be more sought out, and I think the community would have a very good say in regards to opportunities that could be put forward as well as the challenges. Kia ora, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thurston.
Thank you, Chairman. Look, I'd just like to support Councillor Thompson and the comments that she made around Brookfield. We went over there a number of years ago and spoke at a public meeting there. The audience was predominantly aged, and they were profoundly disabled. A lot of these folk were elderly, they were blind or partially sighted. And this goes right to the nub of the issue around lost patronage in Tauranga. Because as Paula has pointed out, these folk traditionally use public transport regularly to go to appointments and to go into the CBD. Invariably, they had a carer or someone accompanying them. But because there was just the simple thing of no bus shelter there for them to rest at whilst waiting for a bus, in the hope that one actually turned up, of course, the issue for them was that someone else in the aged care village had to get their cars out. And so this is all about lost patronage. But as I recall, we as regional council, and support me here, Doug, we even offered to pay for some of these bus shelters some years ago and got a degree of pushback from TCC as it was at that time. But no, it's all about lost patronage and the simple things. And Commissioner Selwood, we're right behind you. If you can drive such simple things as bus shelters in Tauranga, I think it'll go a long way to building and regenerating patronage. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thurston. Just to be clear, while Rotorua and some of the others areas have had a reduced patronage, taking out the school service and just talking about the Bay Hopper service in Tauranga City, it is in the last financial year up 7.5% on the previous year that was down 5.9. That was the start of COVID, and but overall in the last 3 years it is on the rise again. So that at least is positive. But we've certainly got a lot of spare capacity, and Commissioner Selwood, you'll be happy to know that I'm pushing hard to get the actual the data based on bus occupancy for you. I've been asking for a long time, and staff have assured me that they're going to get it for us. You asked for that at the last PT meeting, and I'm working on that, and it will happen. So thank you. Listen, before we go on, Bron, it's 10:25. I just think we should take, how long do you need to just grab a cup of coffee, have a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break? 10 minutes? Okay, let's come, it's now 10:26. Let's come back at 10:36 if you would, please. And we'll just have a short break. Thank you all. It's now 10:36, so we'll get started again. I think that session, do you want to sum up on where we've got to, Bron, before you move on?
If it helps, Ron, I've been taking some notes. I could probably do a quick summary for you.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Okay, so in terms of that, the first session we talked about challenges, and the key notes, the key summarised notes we have is the importance of getting people onto public transport, the importance of looking at both the carrot and the stick including congestion charging, parking prices, carbon price, recognising the importance of understanding the needs regionally and sub-regionally, being more efficient in targeting funding, and also noted the funding challenge. So those were some of the key challenges that were mentioned previously. In terms of summary of key opportunities, so again, the opportunity with how do we get people onto the bus, how do we get that culture change. There was quite a bit of discussion in relation to the importance of having better integration of public transport services and infrastructure delivery, the importance of the link for that with urban design, need for the bus stops, interchanges, the need to bring the community along with these conversations, the importance of moving to zero emissions public transport and potentially considering an eco-friendly brand, tailoring the services, making sure that they meet the sub-regional needs and that those services are linked with other providers, looking at opportunities for private investment and also other options such as linking with MOE in their provision of services. So that's a high-level summary, and you would have seen the notes which Bron was taking. We've also got Elaine online taking notes too as we go along.
Thank you for that, Namuta. I think one of the takeouts that I took out of it that you didn't mention was the fact that we actually have, we've invested a lot of money into the system. The system has lots of merits. We just have to make sure that we're actually using that money wisely, and just adding more services doesn't actually support a better service necessarily. Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really a question to Namuta. You've taken good notes, that's fine. I presume they are going to be publicly available, the meeting notes, and put up on Stella, unlike the Regional Land Transport Committee. You know, we need these briefing notes to be able to track the process as we go through it.
So through the chair, I'll just double check with our governance convener, the process for workshop notes. Oh, cheers, Amanda.
That's correct. Those will be available online, and this meeting is being recorded. The whole recording will also be available on the website.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one point that was mentioned was the need for targeted strategies, and to really just support Commissioner Selwood. It has to be data-based, and it's interesting to me that 47% of Taurang's population is in full-time work, and the vast majority is small to medium businesses. Now that tells you something about your likely audience or customer base. 80% of the population growth for Tauranga, sorry, Mayor Turner, to keep going on and on about Tauranga, but 80% of the population growth is going to be in the over 65s. So, you know, we really have to be data-driven and targeted strategies. And I don't think that point, I think that point needs to be added to the public notes. Thank you.
You're on mute, Councillor Bondelison.
Sorry, I'm sure that has been taken on board, Councillor Thompson, in the notes. And is there any more comment before we ask Bron to move on and start talking about the vision? Bron, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen again. Okay, so we've, as we've said, we've discussed challenges and opportunities. So that's kind of almost setting the context for our strategies going forward. And I think we've already sort of talked a little bit about what some of our key strategies might be at a high level. So moving back up to the, I guess, the highest level is a discussion about a vision statement. As we noted earlier, this is optional for a regional public transport plan. We didn't have one in our last RPTP, but really it seems to have become fairly standard practice in the recent RPTPs that have been developed. But it's up to the committee really to decide whether they want one or not and what it should contain. So I just provided a slide on what is the purpose of a vision statement. It describes a desired future that we are seeking to achieve, i.e. what success looks like when we get there. Ideally, it will tie the different policy strands together into a single overarching statement which will anchor the rest of the document. A good vision statement will be meaningful and evoke an emotional response. The next slide has just summarized some common features of vision statements. And I've also included in the workshop pack some recent examples from RPTPs. I guess there's some good bits there and some not so good bits that people might have their own views on. In terms of the project team, we discussed some potential themes for a vision statement and have put forward the following as potentially being important. We've noted reducing emissions, inclusive access, i.e. access that caters for all types of different users. The customer experience, how they experience the public transport network and their journeys. The key thing of increased use and achieving mode shift. The idea of having seamless end-to-end journeys on urban networks. So this is probably getting back to that the whole issue of integration between infrastructure and services and having a seamless journey for the user. And then another theme that we've probably already discussed quite a bit is how do we deliver convenient and competitive public transport that attracts those current non-users. So that was what was top of mind for the project team, but certainly open to the committee's thoughts, whether they agree, disagree, or have other priorities. So opening it up for discussion.
Talking away with my microphone off. I've got hands up first, Thompson, followed by Nees, followed by Mayor Weber, followed by Councillor Thurston.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a 5-word vision statement: getting more people on board. Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Thanks. I want to thank Councillor Thompson for circulating the document in advance of this workshop. It was called Tomorrow's Public Transport System, and it talks about a vision-led approach to transforming urban mobility. It's by
You've gone on to silent, Councillor Nees. Councillor Nees, you're on silent. You're still on silent. You're still on silent. While you're sorting that out to get you off silent, let's have Mayor Weber.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, could I just finish? There was a couple of really good paragraphs in the summary at the end, and I just wondered if I could talk to them just briefly. I apologise for my technical glitch. I appreciate this is just for the urban issue, but it says by developing a truly integrated transport network which addresses the current climate emergency, is attractive to passengers, responsive to changing technology, and meets local policy objectives, the behaviour shift can be made. And then it comes up with what I think could be something we could consider as a vision statement. I'm sorry it's not as concise as Councillor Thompson's, but it says the key is to develop a safe, inclusive, affordable, convenient, low carbon public transport system, which in combination with active mobility genuinely provides a competitive advantage to car use for local journeys. Now, that's long and it's wordy, but I think it captures all of the concepts, and I'm sort of putting that forward as a starter for 10, hoping that somebody can refine it and come down with something a little bit more concise.
Thank you, Councillor Nees. Councillor Mayor Weber.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think Councillor Thompson got us in the right space at the end of the last thing, and I would like to suggest that we have something like to provide the appropriate public transport service to the community it is designed to serve. You know, yes, we could look at Auckland, we could look at Tokyo. I lived in Tokyo for 3 years, brilliant service for 14 million people. What we need to understand that we have a very different region here. And what, Mayor Turner's talking about is absolutely correct. What's right for Tauranga will not work for Apotiki, Kawerau or Waihi Beach. So we have to tailor it, as Councillor Thompson said, for each area we have to. So to me, it's to provide the appropriate public transport service for the community is designed to serve, because we're going to have different services for the different communities. So picking something out of an international document is great for a city in London to New York, but it ain't going to work here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Weber. Good thought. Councillor Thurston, followed by Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman. Look, I fully, we could spend all day writing a vision statement and ultimately setting it to music, but I'm all for a very short and sweet one, and I fully support the thrust to get a greater customer experience that's positive and unique to each area. And as Councillor Thompson has said, we need to increase usage. But I think it's also interesting to note that of the vision statements that have been shared with us from other TLAs and metropolitans, no one actually refers to the time-saving advantage of using public transport, which I thought was most interesting. Christchurch comes a little bit close to it, but no, all for one line, one strap line, customer experience being positive, unique to each area, and improving usage. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I've obviously spent far too much time around corporates. I'm quite cynical about vision statements, and actually I think the most effect they have is making the people who write them feel good. If we are going to have a vision statement, I fully support Councillor Thompson's one, getting more people on board. It covers all the ins and outs that other people have said. I mean, basically, we want to increase patronage. So yes, if we are going to have a vision statement, something short and sharp, I think.
Thank you. Is there any further speakers? I see Lyle's got his camera off, but his hand up. But do you want to speak, Councillor? No. Okay, so we've got a combination. I think staff have got plenty to work on there. Moving on, Ron.
Okay, I'll just find my mouse again, sorry. It's a bit hard moving between notes and presentation. Right, moving right along to objectives. Sort of a simple definition there. It's like the vision, it's a statement of a desired outcome to be that is to be achieved. However, it may be related to the resolution of a particular issue, problem, or challenge. So I guess the differentiation is that you're getting a little bit more focused on certain themes or areas. So you might have an overarching vision, but your objective statements will sort of branch out into the different aspects of your strategy. In terms of working up objectives, we have some important strategic, national and regional policy documents for the RPTP. At the high level, government policy statement on land transport, and then at the regional level, the Bay Plenty Regional Land Transport Plan. Both contain their own strategic objectives. So there's a bit of a cascade down through the legislation to the RPTP. I've also added a note that as we've sort of, I guess, a key theme that's come out through the discussion already is that sub-regional variation and kind of horses for courses for different parts of the region. So while we may have this sort of high level strategic framework, we're also intending to have sort of more specific strategies for each sub-region, which will be tailored and targeted to the, I guess, the outcomes you're seeking for that region, which might be different. And within that, we're trying to work in the outcomes of exercises like UFD, TSP, some current optimization work we're doing in the Western Bay, and then the Eastern Bay, Plenty and Rotorua transport reviews. So I'll just briefly touch on some of the key areas. We've got the transport outcomes framework, which is referenced in the GPS with its 5 key objectives. We have the GPS strategic priorities, and a key one in there is the better travel options, really is the sort of preeminent one for public transport, but then you've also got considerations around climate change and reducing emissions and safety, so healthy and safe people. RLTP objectives, we have 7 objectives. Again, key ones are the sort of access to inclusive and reliable transport system to allow communities to meet their social, economic, health and cultural needs. So having reviewed that guiding policy, I guess there's 4 recurring themes or common themes that have sort of repeated in those different policy documents. The idea of inclusive access, so it's public transport as a means of enabling people to participate in society and access those opportunities. Economic prosperity, so that's the whole urban networks. We can contribute to economic outcomes by getting people to move more efficiently in urban centres. Environmental sustainability, i.e. reducing emissions, and healthy and safe people. So not only physical health, because each public transport journey starts and ends with a walking, cycling or mobility journey, but also mental health outcomes around social connectedness for people in the community that may not have their own access to a car, etc. So a review of other RPTPs. I've identified some common themes. I won't go into those in detail, assume that you've had a chance to look at those. And then we've, as a project team, taken that information and identified some potential themes for objectives and broken them down into 4 categories, I guess. So the wider environment system, some network sort of planning and design type objectives, the customer user interface. So for example, excellent customer service and accessibility. And then I guess there's those delivery things like how do you deliver, how do you have integrated delivery between organisations, and also thinking about partnerships with communities. How can we look into new models of public transport service provision? So yeah, that's the background information for you to consider, but obviously this is everyone's chance to identify their own themes or categories that we'd like to cover in the objectives.
Thank you, Bron. Before I open up for discussion, can I just suggest that customer/user goes to the top left-hand corner? Because if we don't get our customer experience right, then everything else fails. You know, we won't get mode share if we don't have that right. So that has to be, to me, this is only for me, I welcome others having an opposing view, but if we don't get that right, then we don't have anything. Councillor Thurston, followed by Mayor Webber.
If you want to take a vote on it, Chairman, I'd fully support you there. Customer experience, network design, and accessibility are my three.
Thank you. Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Following on from my suggestion about a vision, and most transport operators I would have assumed these are some of the early objectives. The first one is to provide the appropriate vehicle for the service required. And then the second objective is to increase vehicle capacity utilisation. And to me, if you haven't got those up at the top there, we've got to put the right vehicle in place for the right service.
Yep.
And then we have to, the next thing is, what do we do to drive utilisation? Because, you know, having the right vehicle is nice, but if it's empty, it's actually not sensible. So those two have got to be right at the top of the list. And when I talk about that, this is the right sort of vehicle that meets your carbon emissions, meets all those other sorts of things. They're given, but those first two, if we're not in that space, then we're not really designing the system appropriately, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Doug.
Thanks, Andrew. I just want to concur with the customer experience, but I think that the customer experience goes far greater than just the ride on the bus and the timely arrival and departure of the bus. It's an integrated approach that covers a range of activities, and I'm just conscious that those external factors that contribute to the customer experience, and I think the feral behaviour that has historically taken place in Tauranga here in terms of the bus interchange and even experience on the buses are things that people have only got experience once, and you will take years to get them back onto that service. So it goes much beyond just the delivery of the service. It's the environment in which they operate.
Thank you. Any further comments on this section? Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I do believe that reducing carbon emissions and climate change is important. It is an important objective. It's core to the GPS. That's where the government's going with its policies. So I do believe that that is an important objective also. But I totally agree, customer should be core to everything we do.
Thank you. Any further comment? Moving right along then. Bron.
Okay, thanks for that. And the last aspect of the strategic framework is what I've termed focus areas. So we're sort of moving from sort of our high level categories into delivery and what we're going to focus our delivery on, particularly over the next 3 years before the next review. So I've got a working definition. The high priority matters we plan to focus our efforts on to deliver our vision and objectives. And the idea of these is they create some structure around what we will prioritise in our work. These will need to be supported by actions that we are taking or proposing to take to deliver on them. So covering off on the same sort of categories, you'll have a number of examples of focus areas that have been identified in other RPTPs across those categories. I won't go through them all. In terms of the project team's consideration of focus areas, it's some of those common themes that we've already discussed: a competitive advantage for public transport in urban areas, the customer experience, transition to zero emission public transport. Kind of a new suggestion, there's 2 bullet points there around, I guess this is talking about, for example, the issues in the Eastern Bay and Whakatane, where can we explore new models of public transport service provision that a little bit less rigid than sort of the existing models. So that might encompass community providers, on-demand public transport, and interventions like that. And I guess a key part of that is having those community partnerships to be able to deliver those services. Again, another common theme we've already talked about is the integration of services and infrastructure to create that seamless journey, accessibility for all user groups, and there's another little add-on there around servicing new growth areas. So how are we proactive in terms of getting people into the habit of using public transport in these new areas. Okay, so opening it up for the committee. Councillor, I think your microphone's muted.
Sorry about that. One of the issues that I see is that accessibility for all user groups. That's fine, but we have to determine whether we're going for the hub and spoke model or the connectivity model. And to me, you know, on straight economics, the hub and spoke has to be the right outcome. We shouldn't be running a service just so everybody can go everywhere. We've got to make sure that our disadvantaged can get to essential services. But they don't have to be the system. You know, we probably can't afford to have them being able to access everywhere. So it's fitting a system that suits. That fits the needs of each community. I'm going to start with Councillor Rose, Mr. Thomas, Commissioner Selwood, Councillor Nees, and then Mayor Webber in that order. Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Yeah, look, I just wanted to speak on the importance of the last bullet point there, servicing new growth areas. I think in regards to Tauranga particularly, but also looking into other areas that are growing, such as, of course, Whakatane, Pōtiki and Rotorua, I think we need to be having those conversations not only with our TAs, but even developers as well, and ensuring that services are planned and everything in regards to that during the process of which these new growth areas are taking shape, and actually trying to prioritise infrastructure over housing before the housing is actually put in place. I know that sits with TCC, but I think the fact that it's on here is a very valid point, and it is a way to encourage more public transport use in those different growth areas, as long as we can guarantee that they have a good time service between their home, their whare, and their mahi, wherever that may be. I also just wanted to say that the transition to zero emission public transport is a very valid point in regards to the focus areas. I think being able to have our focus set on changing our bus system or changing our buses so that they are more effective and more how do you put it, more undisturbing as such, because obviously we get a fair bit of comments about noises from buses, and so there's multiple decencies from the focus area of transitioning. And yeah, I guess my last point is the community partnerships, and that's in regards to delivery of public transport services. I think in the likes of, and I'm sure Mayor Turner has already said it, in the likes of Whakatane, Portiki, I think this is a key point, and actually being able to bring our community with us in the stance, moving forward into a more public transport friendly region, as well as a more public transport friendly city and town. So, ka mihi nui.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Look, I agree with a lot of things that Councillor Rose just said. I think this is definitely a level where these focuses and the priority of focus will start to change depending on what area you're looking at. For Rotorua, for instance, we're coming up to a new contract on the public transport services on the buses. So the transition to zero emission vehicles is most probably something we need to be looking at rapidly in Rotorua, so that the new contractors understand what they might be needing to do in that area. Also, we have a lot of new developments underway or being resource consented at the moment in Rotorua, and once again looking at getting public transport into those new growth areas is really important for us. So I think, you know, Rotorua might have different orders of priority, Whakatane or Tauranga. Also, I think we need to look at in this area why we're trying to increase public transport. You know, for Tauranga, one of the issues is to try and reduce congestion, as Mayor Webber has said. In other areas, you know, buses that are appropriate to the service being asked for might be more appropriate. So there'll be different requirements in different areas, and I think this is really where we start to need to look at different focuses for the different communities we're serving. Thank you.
Andrew,
Councillor,
Chair?
you're on mute.
I shouldn't take it off mute. I was trying to get Commissioner Selwood. Are you?
My apologies. Yeah, look, I really just want to focus, and we've had a lot of discussion around, my vision statement is a little bit uncouth, but it's basically more bums on seats. But when we talk about customer experience, I totally agree with the comments that were made in the last section. It is a kind of end-to-end understanding of customers and the experience that they will enjoy. I think, to me, we need to get under the bonnet of that, and I made that point earlier, that we don't want kind of airy-fairy approaches to the customer experience. It's about efficiency of service, time, price, convenience. Those are and convenience is the kind of number one issue, why people choose to drive rather than take public transport. And so we really need to understand the needs of the people we're trying to serve. And that's the needs of people in rural areas as well as commuters in the cities. So really understanding that, I think, is central to achieving the vision that I think we all align to, which is increasing patronage.
If I could add to that, if there's anything here that is missing, it's about the whole, how do we achieve behaviour change? and how do we change people's perception of the service? And a lot of these things, they are the what, and I totally agree with all of them. These are the things that we need to be working on to change people's attitudes about public transport and to change their behaviours. But I do believe that this is a specific focus area. It's the thing that we failed most in that people think public transport's a good idea, but it's not for them. So I do believe there's a whole piece around how do we change people's attitudes.
Thank you, Councillor Neves. Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I just wonder if we're getting ahead of ourselves again. Going back to some of my earlier things, where have we failed in the past, and what are the corrective actions? To me, we've got to nail down our vision and values first before we start going into this objectives and tactics. The fundamental thing that Chair Leader said, and Commissioner Selwood has just covered, and several others, about people want to get on the bus and it's a pleasant experience. They're not standing in the wind and rain to catch the bus. They're not going through the interchange in Tauranga City where there is some undesirable behaviour. If we haven't got those vision and values sorted out and say that's where we're coming from, because the tactics after that are totally different, and so are the focus areas. Are we going to go and buy park and rides, as we've been talking about for 20 years, or are we not? Are we going to put bus stops in place because that's the right sort of thing to protect the people when they're waiting for a bus, as Councillor Thompson's gone, or are we going to continue to talk about it and not do it? So are we serious about the vision and the values? Once we are collectively all signed off on that, then the what and the how, the when and the where and the why, they come later. So to me, this is nice to talk about, but we've got to focus on those two at the top. Are we collectively committed to the vision and the values? Because if we're not, then I'm a bit like Councillor Thompson. You beat your gums for so long, and I know I've only got 361 days left to go, because I just can't go through another term of this. Thank you.
Well, I'm enjoying your input this morning, sir, so don't give up hope yet. Is it, Commissioner Selwood, do you want to speak again, or is that hand up from before? Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Keep it simple. Everything about this plan needs to be simple. Focused, simple, and let's actually get some action. That's as far as I'm concerned. We just now need to move the dial.
Thank you. Commissioner Selwood. No? Then I think just to close, I think there's some really valuable comments come through there. Councillor Rose, you talked about servicing new growth areas and the Tauriko experience. I think we should ask staff what the outcome was on when Tauriko was first developed, the lakes, we put in a bus service ahead of the houses to ensure that we got an effective bus service. That seemed to take a long time to actually come to fruition as an effective bus service. And has staff done any analysis on that strategy, and did it work? Was it the right strategy for going forward? We've got to learn lessons, and that's one that we did try. I'm not so sure whether my gut feeling is it didn't work actually, but maybe I've got that wrong. So I'll ask staff to respond to that.
Can I also add to your question, or add another question on top of that then? Have staff looked at the way that other countries, particularly Brisbane, Australia, have done their planning for public transport in the process of doing exactly what you've just talked about? So kind of linking in with your question.
Okay. So there's some challenges for staff going ahead. I think what we have to get better at as well is our communication strategy. So if we want to take, bring the public on board and get better participation, we actually need to find a mechanism to actually promote the benefits of our transport system, to encourage them. And that isn't straightforward. I appreciate that. I've got now Mayor Webber, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. And a little bit of help to cover off Councillor Rose's. You don't need to look to Brisbane. Just look down the road. Omokara was a growth node. It already has the park and ride purchased. If you drive down Omokara Road, you could see all the bus stops that are being built into the new road. The bus stops are in place around Omokara. That was part of the original planning. The problem is NZTA have not fronted with the facility for the bus to travel down. So nobody's going to jump into a bus after Western Bay's put a whole lot of money into the public transport infrastructure when they just join the queue on State Highway 2 and travel to Tauranga at 10 kilometres an hour in the commuter times. So, you know, this is a little bit bigger than just planning for it. You've got to take all of the partners with you. And I don't know if NZTA are part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Wise words. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to your comments, Chair, around communication. I've just done my own community survey in terms of people I meet every day on the reserve where I walk. And probably I've spoken to a large number of people, mostly my age group plus. And the greatest barrier for them is not understanding how to use the bus. And I have suggested that it would be good to have a video clip up on our website, actually telling people how they actually go about using the bus. But why not a letterbox drop or something? A lot of people just don't know how to actually use the bus system. So for what it's worth, there's my little community survey for you. And I won't charge you anything for that, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you. Well done, you. All right. Brian, have you got enough to work on there?
Yep, certainly have quite a lot of strands of thought there to sort of process and collect together. But thank you all for your input. So that kind of completes the discussion on the strategic framework elements of the RPTP. I'll go away and process that, and our next steps will be to have another workshop probably on the 30th of November, at the same day as the meeting, where we'll sort of complete the feedback loop and start talking about, I guess, the more detailed policy areas on our key policy topics. So the next part of the workshop.
Before we go through that, through the chair, perhaps I could just summarise the key outtakes of that second section in terms of the comments that we heard from the vision, objectives and focus areas. Of course, we'll be writing up the notes and those will be on the website, but just wanting to make sure that we captured everything. So in terms of the vision, obviously there was a range of views. We had the getting more people on board, bums on seats, safe, unique to each area, designed for people, safe, inclusive, affordable, convenient, low carbon service provided in combination with active mobility, and that's competitive use of cars for local journeys, and then providing appropriate public transport service to the community that it's designed to serve. Those were the sort of the key vision statements that we've captured in terms of that vision conversation. That was followed by a conversation on objectives, where we heard key things around the importance of the customer focus, and that it's broader than just the end-to-end journey. There are other factors to consider in terms of the context, the importance of focusing on reducing carbon emissions, the importance of understanding the type of vehicle required and ensuring driving utilisation of public transport services. In terms of the focus areas, we had a lot of discussion around, or heard a lot of discussion around the importance of service and growth areas, including the request for infrastructure up front, the importance of the transition to zero emissions, the importance of understanding the people that we're trying to serve, and the different focuses for different, the need to focus on providing different services tailored to those different communities, how we're going to achieve behaviour change and the change in people's attitudes. So that was some of the key themes that we heard coming through in the conversation.
Thank you for that. Anybody, any gaps? Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you. For the next meeting, as part of the background, could somebody circulate the meaning or the definitions of SMART objectives? Because I think that's the bit we tend to miss. We have all these fluffy objectives, but are they specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound? You know, I think we've got to get back to what we could achieve. Because, you know, I go back to my earlier statement this morning. If we're not going to change the dial, as Councillor Thompson says, then just change the date on the existing one and give the rest of the year off to all of us. Thank you.
Pretty clear message there for staff. Thank you, and thank you, Bron, for your for this session. I think we're moving now to James. Is that correct? To do fares and what was the next? Fares and financial sustainability. James, the floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou, thanks very much everyone, and this session is aiming to focus on what is a really key area of public transport policy, which is around the question of what we should be charging people to use the services we provide. And so what I'd like to do, if I can share my screen, is to start with actually looking at the current regional public transport plan policy around fares. And Mayor Webber is absolutely right. What we need to do is look at this current policy and firstly examine whether we think we have achieved what we set out to when this was published back in 2018. And then secondly, ask ourselves what has changed and the extent to which we feel that the current policy needs to be revised, given that we may have different objectives, we may have learned about what has worked well and what hasn't worked, and give ourselves an opportunity to say to ourselves, how much do we really want to go down the route of a radical change, and what would radical change actually achieve? So hopefully you can all see my screen. And this is the current regional public transport plan policy on fares. So you can all see that there is a set of different items under the fare policy. And the very first one, which is number 10, is well worth looking at because it sets a region-wide fare box recovery ratio for public transport services above 30% and a target to achieve 40% by 2028. And just to be clear, the fare box recovery ratio is essentially the percentage of our operating costs for running the service that we receive back in fares that people actually pay to use our bus services. So if it was 100%, then essentially we would be breaking even. Anything under 100%, and there is a subsidy going to the public transport system, which essentially comes from the taxpayer or the ratepayer. So that's our current policy. And if you can see, I've just changed my screen, and this is the current assessment of where the fare box recovery actually is. And the figures show that over time, since 2013, 2014, the fare box recovery ratio has essentially declined from 33% down to the current year for which we have data, which is just under 15%. So when you look at that and compare it to our policy, you can see that we are essentially, from a financial sustainability perspective, heading in the wrong direction and away from the policy that we set in 2018. So I guess a key question I would like to pose straight away is the concern that councillors have about that situation and what we need to do to address it. So I'm happy to take any comments around that situation now.
Chairman Leader, followed by Mr. Thomas.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, at last we've got to the guts of the issue. So this is not good reading. So you overlay the bums on seats, as Stephen put it, with this graph, and you've got a wicked problem. So your revenue share of fare box recovery is going down and your bums on seats is going down. The Eastern Bay is the better one, but they all take a trend downward. So if this was your own private business, you're running a supermarket and your revenue is going down, your customers walking out the door, you'd have to do something. So essentially, the purpose of today, I think, I'm not too worried about what the current policy said. Current policy is not being adhered to, it's not working. So, but this is the guts of the problem that we've got here. I don't have the solutions to you, but surely staff should have some recommendations in terms of the way to fix this, and it may encompass all those other issues we've talked about today. Thanks, Andrew.
Good thoughts. Mr. Thomas, followed by Mayor Webber, followed by Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Look, for some reason, I'm still stuck on the policies. I didn't get the graph of what's actually happening at the moment. So my question was just, what year is those graphs for where we've dropped to the 15%?
They are, the graph is in the agenda that was circulated prior to the meeting. Page 50.
Page 50, great, thank you. Yeah, so I see, that's for the year 2020, 2021. Surely that has been affected significantly by COVID and the fact that we were still running buses with very few patrons on them and getting the extra subsidy from government. So I'd be interested to know how much that has affected that and whether that's one of the reasons why there has been such a dramatic drop in that year. I can see it is trending down and that is a concern, but that was just my question.
I don't think this is a COVID issue. Unless we had COVID in 15, 16 through to 20.
As I said, I can see it's trending down, but yeah, that dropped 14% is alarming, but I presume is affected by COVID.
Mayor Webber.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose this is a classic of not a smart objective. And I think we've got to look, I think just looking at fare box recovery on its own is not clever. What we've got to look at is, Chair Leader and Commissioner Selwood said it's about bums on seats. What's the opportunity cost to the region of not getting bums on seats? And this is where I come back to, if we're not got the right environment for people to travel on the buses, if we haven't got park and rides, if it's so damned easy to park for free in Tauranga City, then that's not encouraging people. And I think, so whilst they're in there worrying about the fare box recovery, don't worry about it because the graph is showing you what's happened. It's the opportunity cost that we've got to fix it. And if you don't look at those other dynamics, then this is going to continue. Look at the period over the last 18 months where Tauranga City have made it easier to park in the city, you know, free parking up till 9 o'clock in the morning and free parking after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, that just doesn't follow logic. So you'll get fare box recoveries like this until you resolve those other issues. Thank you.
Commissioner Selwood.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, to me, this is where the emphasis on data is important. And what's driving that fare box recovery is there are a whole bunch of routes, trips, times of day where bus patronage is low. So we need to understand the subsidy per trip by time of day. And then we can target the service to those where we're going to get the greatest patronage and therefore the best fare box recovery. I do note the comments, just as an aside, about parking in Tauranga. Of course, one of the drivers for that is the dead city centre that we have, and that's the reason why parking has been provided. To be honest, I think that's a contributor. I agree in terms of patronage, but I don't know that it's a significant contributor because the city's still dead even with those car parks. But that's just an anecdotal aside. I think that the core to this is really understanding the cost drivers. The answer is increasing patronage. And that means that we need to focus in on the customers that are really going to make that transition. The commuters that do have a destination that can be well served by public transport, particularly bus services. The city is a key component of that. We've got to focus in on the high density employment areas and make sure that we get our origins and destination, a correlation of service with our origins and destinations. Until we do that, I think we're just going to face increasing fare box recovery issues. And I think the strategy that we've just discussed in terms of really identifying customer needs and targeting a service to meet it is fundamental to answering this issue for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to, you had your hand up for a while, Councillor Thompson, have you okay?
I just want to support what Mayor Webber and Stephen have just said. I think our total focus needs to be on bums on seats, getting people on board first and foremost, and then look at the relationship between price and patronage. But to try and fiddle around with it at this stage, no, I just want to be focused on getting people used to being on board. Thank you.
Here.
Oh, that was firm. Thank you all. James, any follow-up?
Yeah, thanks very much. I've been listening to the discussion with interest, and I think there's a combination of factors going on here. So there is no doubt that the inability to grow the levels of patronage in the way that we would ideally like is a key contributor to the declining financial performance. And to be clear, what we're really after is growth in patronage from people who would be willing to pay a fare for using the service. So whilst we have had some success in driving patronage amongst school children in particular, a lot of the reason for that is because the council has had a policy of offering free travel at school times, and not surprisingly a lot of children see that as a good deal and use the bus accordingly. Anecdotally, we're hearing that a lot of those children were people who would previously have walked or cycled and are getting the bus a few stops to ensure they don't actually have to walk and cycle perhaps as far as they would have done previously. And so we have to ask ourselves whether that's a situation where we're really happy about, or whether it's a case of looking at our target markets and saying, where do we really want to drive patronage growth? And given that we provide services based on, you know, sort of peak vehicle demand, we really need to be, in my view, targeting commuters, people who would otherwise drive a private car to their destination, particularly their workplace, and give them the incentives to use the bus instead of the private car. As people have alluded to earlier, one of the key issues is the availability of free parking at the destination end, which makes it very, very challenging for public transport, where you have to provide a fare at point of use to offer that perception of value for money. I think another point to make is our costs in terms of what we pay are relatively fixed by the contracts that we sign with the private operators. So it's actually quite difficult to change our operating costs very quickly in relation to the income we receive. So we really do have to focus on driving patronage and providing a series of incentives to be able to make bus use more attractive. So this discussion has a number of questions around it, and one of the key ones for me is, what is a quote fare for people to pay? And there are a number of sub-questions under that which I think are worth highlighting.
James, just before we go on to that discussion, I've got a couple of hands up.
Please do.
Can we do that first?
Of course,
so we're on, so Commissioner Selwood, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Well, thank you. One of the points I meant to make before is this is more than just a revenue issue as well, as we all know, but we may actually be increasing our carbon emissions by running empty buses at the wrong time, at the wrong frequency. And so this is, why it's so important that we really optimise the provision of services. And I think, just noting James's comments about the focus on commuters, I totally agree. I think that's where the priority needs to be, because that's where we're going to get the best bang for buck. It's also going to be where we'll help congestion the most. It's also going to be where we're going to be able to reduce emissions the most. But if we continue to run empty buses around the city, we're actually arguably making our problem worse, not better. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, James, can you just repeat what you said about school children, please? I think I got you wrong. So could you just repeat what you said?
Okay, so what I think I said was that in terms of the impact of the free fare policy, the anecdotal evidence we have is that school children who previously would have walked or cycled are now more inclined to get a bus, even if it's for just a few stops, because it is free and therefore it is attractive for them to use. And I've certainly talked to a number of bus passengers who observe this phenomenon on the section of route between Bayfair and Mount Maunganui College, and that's an area where we're now starting to get some complaints from adult fare paying passengers saying that actually at certain times the buses are so full of children that it's not always easy to either get a seat or in some cases even get on the bus itself.
Perhaps just to add to that through the chair as well, we also have a lot of anecdotal information from principals and teachers at schools about the positive impact that the free fares have had in terms of reduced congestions and before and after school too. So just balancing out the picture.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just a little bit concerned about where you might be going with this, James, because I can give you plenty of anecdotal evidence which parents are absolutely thrilled with the bus service because it frees up 2 hours of their time. Creates a whole lot of confidence, socialisation of kids. So are you going somewhere in terms of a suggestion that we no longer provide free fares, or where are you going?
I'm not going anywhere. All I'm saying is that when we are setting fair policy, there are a number of factors we need to consider and balance. And one of those is the financial cost of providing free travel for school children and the impact that that has on some peak hour bus services in terms of inability for passengers to get a seat or access the services. But fundamentally, it is for councillors to agree and decide what is the most important policy areas that we want to promote through fares. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, James. And just to follow on from that, just remember that NZTA, I believe, is still supporting our free bus for students because it is a trial, but long term they will not support it if once it goes out of a trial period. So my concern is we've got, as you said, there's 47% of Tauranga rate people are in work, but the rest of the community is on a fixed income and are getting increasingly challenged by our rates. And so we have to think about the effects on all of our community. Now I've got Commissioner Selwood and then Councillor Rose, Councillor Thurston, followed by Mayor Webber.
Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay.
No,
Councillor Rose, you're on mute.
Oh, no, kia ora, I'm not on mute now. Don't stress. No, look, I think Councillor Thompson has a very valid point. And also, James, you do bring a valid point as well. As a regular user of a bus between Mount Maunganui and Bayfair, as well as between my whare and Multimodal to town, I very much have gotten used to the floods of Multimodal College and Mount Maunganui College students during those periods of time. However, I think the thing that we've got to understand is that we're talking about getting bums on seats. And yes, we want commuters getting on the buses, but I have to say it again. If we don't actually talk to our commuters, we don't actually bring them along on this journey, then we cannot think that going in, doing some communication plan or something, and then lowering our fares is going to change anything. Because we're still getting it was this morning I counted 15 people in each singular car down my home stretch on Multimodal Road. And easily they could have been going into town, jump on a bus and go from there. So we've got to actually make sure that when we're talking communications and when we're talking about fears as well, that we're talking to people. And may I say, James, I do love that last question you've got, the how can the balance of costs between car travel and bus usage be changed? I really do like that because it's actually getting us thinking. It's actually encouraging us to think outside the box. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor, I think it was Thurston next, then Mayor Webber.
Yeah, I found, James, your comments around we now have a problem developing where we've got too many bums on seats. I thought that was an interesting aspect to today's conversation. But look, having borne the scars of going around countless public meetings in Tauranga, talking to the community and to the schools, I make no apologies for us answering the call from the schools and from parents. Look, we all know, look, for God's sake, let's get over it. We all know why we did it. It was to take pressure off the current infrastructure in Tauranga and to get Tauranga moving. It was not a social service initiative, which is often inferred to by many people, but we know why we did it. Let's stand tall call and defend it, for God's sake. But no, I've got no issue with kids filling up a bus and a number of elderly people or whatever having to wait for the next bus. No, let's take a reality check here, guys. Come on. I'm sounding like Mayor Webber now.
Mayor Webber, you can respond then.
He's got, God forbid, people start sounding like me or getting grumpy like me. But getting back, I think Councillor Thompson raised the issue that's quite valid. Looking at fare box recovery on its own is not the right sort of thing to do. We wanted bums on seats. We've achieved that. And because it's free, it had to have an impact on fare box recovery. I think Councillor Sell was absolutely correct. Look at the data. And that's where I think we've got to go back to square one and look at the data. Make the comment about Tauranga Central CBD being dead. Over the last 20 years, I'll bet you the number of people that are working or studying in Tauranga CBD now is significantly higher than what it was 20 years ago. The retail end has changed because people are going out to Bay Fair, where we've encouraged them to go, Bethlehem, the Papamoa, all of these different malls around Tauranga Crossing, the latest one. We've shifted the dynamics, and I think we need to understand what dynamics are driving it and what are we trying to achieve. Getting those school kids on buses makes a hell of a lot of sense. So I think looking at fare box recovery on its own is inappropriate. Are we running an efficient service? Because you'll never make money out of a public transport operation. It's a cost to operate. And we've got to get our head in that space. How do we minimize the cost to operate? And having the right buses, the right size buses, running at the right times, all of those sort of things will have a greater impact than spending any time looking at fare box recoveries. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, followed by Councillor Neves.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Look, I agree with the comments around we can't take the fare box in isolation. I think especially with getting school kids using buses, we're also investing in the future there as kids get used to using public transport to get around. The hope is that they will continue to see public transport as a viable method of transport rather than moving to private cars. And it's an age-old practice in the computer industry that I come from, where you provide cheap or free product to schools to capture kids as they go through and become adults and continue to use products from those same manufacturers. So I think it's an absolutely valid thing to be doing, to be providing low or free fares to kids. And we've got to look at our overall picture, not just how much they're costing us.
Councillor Neves.
Thank you. I just want to address your question. What are the most important factors which drive bus patronage and mode shift? I think they're convenience, I think they're perception, and they're cost. So I take issue with the comments that staff make that we don't want to have free fares or low fares because we might end up having too many people on our buses. That isn't that what we want. If people start seeing full buses whizzing around, they'll be thinking, oh, actually the bus service must be really working. There's a lot of people using it, must be good. Perhaps I should try it. So I fully support, until we have a bus service that is functioning and people see it as a viable, convenient option to using their car, I don't think we can be putting the prices up because people won't perceive its value for money. So that's my just start at the 10. I think it's fare box recovery target is something that we might have to take a hit on while we're trying to convert and incentivize people to use the bus. But at the same time, we've got to make it much more attractive and convenient, and we've got to convince them it's worthwhile using it.
Thank you. Those taken on board. James, you continue.
Yeah, thanks. So the first question I think is a really interesting one, and something that our fare policy should certainly look to try and address. So, if we do focus on our passengers for a moment, we can ask a series of questions about what fairness in terms of a fare actually means. So some questions could be, for example, should people pay more to travel further on the basis that the further someone travels, the more cost or usage they're making out of that service? So is that something that is an issue to be looked at in the RPTP? Another one is, should people who are better off and perhaps willing to pay more for their journey actually pay more? And those whose income is very low and within which transport makes up a significant proportion of that, should they receive concessions on the basis of ability to pay? Another question is, should there be more peak and off-peak pricing structures? So the costs of providing the service are driven by the peak requirement, particularly at school times. So is there an opportunity to get more people on buses outside of the peak when we know that loadings are much, much lower than during the peak hours? Is that an opportunity to fill those buses that we all agree need to be actually filled at times when demand is much less? And another question is, should there be frequent user discounts to encourage people to make a commitment to using the bus on a more regular basis? At the moment, we don't generally offer discounts for frequent users. People just pay using the B card for a single journey, and then they pay the next time. And if they pay 10 journeys a week, that's $27. But what if we said a maximum of 10 journeys should cost you no more than $20, and then every other journey after that is free? Is that kind of approach something that we should be considering for our RPTP policy? So those are just some ideas about what we could do to make bus fares fair for a different demographic and different groups of people. Happy to take any questions or comments on that.
We've got Mayor Weber with his hand up. Mayor Weber.
Geez, I'm getting frightened now. Further distance, a higher fee. I don't know why executives are even thinking this. So start a bus at Te Puke coming into Tauranga City. The first person on the bus has got the furthest to travel. They'll pay the highest price. The last person getting on the bus that might only be going 2 stops from the CBD pays a lower price. Which bum pays the first? You're getting into marginal costing here, and there is a far more pragmatic way of running it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel on distance versus density. That's been proven, years ago. Charging for more distance, a higher price, is just fraught with danger. The dairy industry, the furthest farmer pays no more than the nearest farmer, because it's a cost of getting people or the milk from A to B. We've all been making the point, we should be focusing on getting bums on seats. This other stuff is a bit of an exercise in academia, and I hope like hell we're not wasting too much executive time on that. Thank you.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, look, I have to solely agree with Mayor Weber. It would be a first for me. Well, no, it's not a first, but I think having looked at how things work in Wellington as well, and being a public transport user in Wellington, I must say I hated the fact that I had to pay extra just to get to course and back home. So I lived in Wellington CBD and had to go to the hut for school, and actually I really hated that. I had to pay an extra $2 or $3 even if I was a student. So I think what Mayor Weber's saying is very valid. I also think that the questions that are being posed can be answered by, I guess for me, they should be able to be answered by themselves. I think we need to have a better understanding of our community and actually what our community want. So, yeah, when it comes to fares, I would say, like, let's take a page out of Canterbury's book. Councillor Van Dalsen or Mr. Chair, you would know. You've probably had lots of conversations with Environment Canterbury, and the fact that I think it's after eight concessions on a bus, you're free for the rest of the week. I think something like that would be a real good incentive for those commuters. And I think it's something that this council and this committee should have a look at in the near future.
Thank you. I recognise I had a note from Commissioner Selwood that he will need to leave in a minute. So appropriate that you have a last say before you do have to leave.
Thank you, Chair. My message on all of the questions is really repeating Councillor Thompson's message. Keep it simple. A really simple pricing structure that anyone can understand is central to getting patronage up, I think. So with that, I attend to my apologies and I will have to leave the meeting.
Thank you for your input. Councillor Thompson.
No, Stephen said it all. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Look, I fully support the idea of Mayor Webber's comments around flat fares rather than charging more on distance. I think often rural communities feel isolated anyway, and if they feel they're paying a higher rate, they're just going to jump in their car. I've got to say, out of all the cities I've lived in around the world, and I realise they are much bigger cities and have much more complex transport needs. The public transport systems that work the best are always subsidised, and they tend to have a flat fare structure across the whole city, and outside into the the satellite towns. So I think that seeing everyone being in a club and we all pay the same amount for our transport, no matter where we live, I think that's the way to go. I think that's my experience is that's what works the best. I think local government does that on a lot of things, rubbish collection, water supplies, all those sorts of things, where it is based around, doesn't matter how far away you are from the service, you pay the same price as anywhere else. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce what James said around perception. And, frankly, I think the perception of great big diesel spewing yellow empty buses is an issue that we should deal with. And I can't for the life of me see why we can't just experiment around our city with some smaller EV type vehicles where we know that there is going to be people wanting to travel intra communities. So I think perception's a really big issue we've got to face up to. Thanks.
Very good comment along the and I'll ask James to comment in a minute on the new GPS, because that was a constraint that we could not get smaller buses under the old GPS. Can we in the new one? Can I just say even the likes of the London bus and underground service runs at a huge deficit each year, even though it's hugely patronised. But they do have a weekly concession ticket, so that once you buy the weekly ticket, that is the amount for the whole week. And I think that there is some merit in looking at that. It's still a simple system. It's either your normal system or with a weekly concession ticket. So James, can you enlighten us a little bit, please, about the GPS and smaller buses?
So I think you're probably referring to the public transport operating model review, Councillor Van Dalsen.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, that's right. So at the moment, the Ministry of Transport is reviewing the public transport operating model, which essentially sets the rules through which contracts that Bay of Plenty Regional Council enter into with the private bus operators. So one of the challenges we have under the previous system is we enter into long-term 9-year contracts with bus operators who essentially provide the vehicles that run on the street. So we don't own those vehicles. And if we want to replace those vehicles with something that is either smaller or is maybe electric, the challenge we have at the moment is that the contract makes it very difficult to do without incurring additional cost over and above what we already pay. Now, it is possible to do, but it takes a lot of time and effort to negotiate with the private operator because they have bought those vehicles for this particular service, and those vehicles last up to 20 years. The private sector's view is that if the public sector then wants to do something else, that's an additional cost. Now, the idea of the future public transport operating model is that councils are given the opportunity to own the fleet themselves, as opposed to having to rely on a private sector operator. And in theory, that should give more flexibility for the council to say, on these particular routes or in this particular area, we could actually have a different set of vehicle assets that actually more meet the requirements that we feel are appropriate for our communities. So fingers crossed, there will be an opportunity under the new public transport operating model, which is going to get a new name, by the way, that we can actually undertake that kind of initiative if we decide that owning fleet is something that the council wants to pursue as a policy. At the moment, because we have to negotiate with private sector operators who've bought all these very expensive buses, it's pretty difficult to deliver anything quickly. And I realise that leads to a lot of frustration amongst communities who keep seeing the same buses trundling round and round all the time. And feel that actually they want something different.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it. And if you can keep us up to date on any new movements in that, would be appreciated as well. James, can you give me an indication of timing now for how much longer we need? Just so people, because it is coming up lunchtime, and I just want to work out whether we take a break or whether what's your timing looking like?
Oh, pretty flexible. I mean, to be honest, this discussion slide is the key one I wanted to get across and have a discussion about these different initiatives and ideas that we could put into the new RPT policy. So I have very little else to present in terms of additional information. So I'm just happy to take any further questions or comments, but in terms of material, that's pretty much where we're at. So what we have got is a really clear steer, I think, from councillors around what they see as the priorities. And in my view, just trying to sum it up, is that the current 2018 RPT policy around fares is not something now that generally appears to be fit for our current purpose. So we will need to go away and have quite a good look at how we change it to meet the requirements that councillors have expressed today.
Thank you. Mayor Webber.
Thanks again. When I go back to the comment about dynamics, we need to understand the 9-year contract we've signed. It'll be a very brave council that walks away from that, because it'll cost you an arm and a leg to buy yourselves out of it. What we've got is what we've got, and we need to just accept that when you're looking at the fare, because we went into a contract well-intentioned, and it is what it is. It's there for 9 years, and it'll be damned expensive to walk away from. Because as James just said, the recovery on a bus like that is over 20 years. If it's doing high kilometres, you might get a payback after 1 million kilometres or 8 years, whichever comes first. The leasing companies know all these data. Most good transport operators know this data as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Namuta.
Oh, kia ora, councillors, perhaps, and Chair and Mayor. Mayors, perhaps it would be useful if I just build on James's summary point, the other key points that we've got down as staff, just to double check we've got everything. Would that be useful?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so we had, there was a real emphasis on making sure we focus on getting bums on seats. There was a desire for us to keep it simple in terms of our fare structure. There was support for continued free fares for students. There was a need to, there was an understanding of subsidisation and the costs in relation to the impact on fare box recovery to get bums on seats. There was a discussion around the importance of focusing on targeting those who can pay, the ability to pay, being the commuters. There is a request for increased efficiencies in terms of looking at how our buses operate and the routes, looking at how we can minimise costs. There is a desire to focus on convenience, for us to consider people's perceptions. Another key focus area was costs, but not looking at costs on its own. And costs based on distance wasn't supported, and there was a request for further understanding of the contract details too. That was a key summary that we got down.
Thank you for that. Any add-ons from anybody? Sound like you've got it pretty right. Any more comments to James? James, you look as if you've quietened them down. Well done.
Excellent. Thanks very much for all the comments. Really, really useful.
Is there a wrap up from anybody in staff? There been none?
It sounded like people were comfortable through the chair with the summary that we captured. So building on James's comments and my comments. So it's good from us.
Thank you. It just leaves me to thank everybody for their participation in this. I think it's been, for me, it's been very useful to get these opinions. I want to make sure that we see action on the ground. You know, bums on seats is a pretty good vision to me. And yes, I agree with Councillor Thompson that the communication strategy that it goes around this is absolutely key, because at the moment people are seeing empty buses and it's not reflecting well upon us at the moment, and we will benefit as the TAs and Bay of Plenty Regional Council for bums on seats, but so will the public. So we look forward to this review and the outcomes of it, and to get a streamlined operation. I just see there's a chat there. Has anybody got something? Last guy. No, that's Councillor Rose leaving. No, that's fine. Any last comments by anybody before we close this meeting down?
Perhaps Councillor Von Daddison, I could just add and just recognise the Mayor Turner also added a vision to the comments too, which we'll pick up as staff as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, without further ado, I'd like to thank everybody, including staff, for their active participation, and have a good day.
Kia ora, folks. Thank you, everyone.